It is believed that the first auto insurance policy in the United States was sold in 1897 to a man who had built his own car. 30 years later, Massachusetts became the first state to make it a legal requirement, and today, some form of auto insurance is required for drivers in every U.S. state except New Hampshire. And considering there are almost 300 million registered vehicles within the country, auto insurance has become a massive industry that affects most of us. Everything has consolidated quite a bit over the years, to a point where there are currently 4 providers that I would say stand out above all the others. State Farm, Progressive, Geico, and Allstate combine for over half the market, meaning if you are a driver in the United States, you are more likely than not to be a customer of one of these companies. I promise, they're all more distinct from each other than it may initially seem, so in this video, I think it would be interesting to look back at their histories while comparing them in 4 key categories. Starting out with maybe the most basic comparison, their size and their offerings. All 4 of them started out by selling auto insurance as the auto industry was emerging in the 1920s and the 1930s. Notably, State Farm started a life insurance subsidiary in 1929 and a fire insurance subsidiary in 1935 that later became the basis of their iconic 3-circle logo, which, by the way, has been featured in my intro that you just saw since the start of my channel. Today, State Farm is the country's largest provider of homeowners insurance, accounting for about 30% of their business. In the 1950s, Allstate was following their lead by expanding into all these different areas, currently ranking as the 2nd largest home insurance provider, while Progressive and Geico have not been as aggressive in expanding this way. In fact, Geico even sold most of their homeowner policies in the 1990s, but in 2014, Progressive did make a push into that market when they acquired American Strategic Insurance for $875 million. And I want to mention that Progressive is currently the country's largest provider of motorcycle insurance. I want to be clear that despite everything else, auto insurance has always been the central focus for these companies, and in that area, State Farm has been the #1 provider since the 1940s, currently responsible for $68 billion worth of written premiums, accounting for 19% of the market, followed by Progressive, Geico, and Allstate, according to the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. For my next category, I want to compare the unique ownership of these companies. The oldest one of the group is in fact State Farm, founded in 1922 as a mutual company, meaning it is essentially owned by the customers. The dividends are distributed to policyholders instead of shareholders, like you would typically see in a public company. They have maintained that structure from the beginning, and it will likely not be changing anytime soon. Now, Progressive also started out as a mutual company in 1937, when it was founded by 2 attorneys named Joe Lewis and Jack Green. However, 28 years later, Joe's son Peter led a leveraged buyout of Progressive and went on to turn it into a public company that, by the way, has increased in value by 26,000%. Now, Geico became a public company in the 1940s before being slowly acquired by Warren Buffett and his company Berkshire Hathaway. He says he personally started investing in it as a young man in the 1950s, and by 1995, his company already owned 51% of it when they agreed to purchase the rest of it for over $2 billion. So for over 30 years now, Geico has been fully owned by Berkshire Hathaway. Meanwhile, it was sort of the opposite for Allstate in that they originated as part of a larger company. In 1931, the retailer Sears decided to start an auto insurance business named after a popular brand of tires that had originated a few years earlier. Allstate quickly became a significant part of their company, and it stayed that way for over 60 years. When they started Allstate, Sears was mainly a mail order business, famous for their catalog, so the original idea was to sell insurance directly through the mail, which would cut out the need for agents. But then, Sears started opening a bunch of department stores that conveniently served as locations to sell insurance. So from the beginning, Allstate was able to save money and expand their reach by utilizing all these assets provided by Sears. By the 1990s, Sears was having issues with their core retail business and wanted to refocus on it, so they sold 20% of Allstate to the public in what turned out to be the largest largest ever IPO in the United States at the time, and then 2 years later they spun off the rest of the company. I also want to bring up that Sears also originated the Discover card that was also spun off right around that same time. So just organizing everything here, State Farm has always been a mutual company. Progressive switched from mutual to public company, Geico switched from public to part of a larger company, and Allstate switched from part of a larger company to public. I think you'll agree that there is a lot going on here, and that they have all had completely different journeys. Next up on the list, I want to compare their customers, and so much of this category has to do with risk. State Farm, for example, goes so far back that they were the first insurance company to set their rates based on the likelihood that a person will be involved in an accident, evaluating factors like their previous driving record. Yeah, the company is called State Farm because it was started by a former farmer that specialized in selling policies to farmers, partially because they were believed to be safer drivers. They were in open spaces, so comparatively fewer opportunities to crash into other cars. It was a similar situation with Geico. That name was chosen as an acronym. It stands for Government Employees Insurance Company because it was originally offered exclusively to government employees, who were also believed to be a low-risk segment of the population. You know, generally more responsible and more financially stable than most others, especially back then during the Great Depression. Allstate around that time was the first company to alter their rates based on the age, mileage, and usage of the car that the person was driving. Over time, as more data was collected and analyzed more effectively by computers and algorithms, these companies became more sophisticated at determining who was more likely to be involved in an accident, so they would alter their restrictions. Progressive was able to build a name for themselves by insuring the people that most of the others determined to be too risky. In the 1950s, their primary concern became determining who was the least risky of the high-risk individuals, sort of like picking out the best parts of the scraps that the others had left behind. To this day, Progressive continues to stand out in this category. Like, if you have a bad driving record, Progressive would probably be your best chance at getting insured over those other three. Finally, going back to the list and maybe saving the best for last here, I want to compare some of the marketing of these companies because all of them have had long-running, iconic campaigns. I stand by my opinion that Geico is like the master when it comes to funny and memorable commercials. I mean, the gecko, the caveman, Maxwell the pig remains my personal favorite. Oh, and that one with the camel, I still think of that whenever I hear the name Mike, which is pretty often because that is my name. One of the first videos I ever made on this channel was called The Brilliance of Geico Ads, so I recommend checking out that video if you want more details, but these other companies have also done a great job. In the 1990s, Progressive was attracting a lot of younger customers, partially because they were utilizing technology to make buying and comparing insurance easier than ever before. Specifically, they were the first to do it through their website and over the phone, with 1-800-AUTO-PRO that was promoted with a line of commercials featuring E.T. himself. But obviously, their most successful campaign is Flo from Progressive, played by actress Stephanie Courtney, who has been showing everyone how easy it is to buy and compare auto insurance since 2008. Looking over at State Farm, in 1971, Barry Manilow was paid $500 to write that jingle, "Like a Good Neighbor," that I'm sure we have all heard hundreds of times at this point. In recent years, State Farm has utilized the NBA pretty heavily, like the venue where the Atlanta Hawks play is now called State Farm Arena, and maybe you remember Chris Paul's twin brother State Farm agent Cliff Paul, who also likes to assist. In 2011, that famous Jake from State Farm commercial premiered, you know, the one where he's wearing the khakis, that was sort of a response to Geico and Progressive winning over so many younger customers. Jake Stone, the person in the commercial, actually worked for the company, but in 2020, as the role was expanded, he was replaced by actor Kevin Miles, who has been featured in countless advertisements since. Now, Allstate is kind of the one that stands out here. To me anyway, they have been more serious and not quite as memorable. Since Sears was such a well-known trusted brand, they wanted to promote those ideas of security and trust. In 1950, a sales manager named Davis Ellis came up with the slogan, "You're in good hands." I guess a doctor said it to him and his wife while their 18-year-old daughter was sick at the hospital, and he figured the comfort that it gave them in that moment would be a good feeling to convey to Allstate customers. Logical enough, and over the past 75 years, hands have remained the focus of their marketing. It became their logo with those cupped hands, and most of their commercials would feature people saying that slogan or cupping their hands, including the ones featuring Dennis Haysbert starting in 2003. However, in 2010, they did start those Mayhem commercials featuring Dean Winters personified quantifying all these things that could go wrong that are much more comical than anything else that I've seen from Allstate. So now they have all stepped up their marketing, and all 4 of them have long-running, recognizable mascots that have a distinctive way of promoting the benefits of their respective auto insurance. To summarize here, State Farm stands out as being the biggest, the first of the group, the only mutual company at this point, and the most involved with other types of insurance. Progressive stands out for specializing in higher risk individuals and for adopting technology and comparisons earlier than the others. Allstate stands out for their former association with Sears and more traditional approaches, while Geico stands out for their longtime association with Warren Buffett and innovative marketing that you can tell has had an influence on all the others. In my opinion, insurance companies are now responsible for some of the best commercials out there. Let me know in the comments, what are your thoughts about all of these auto insurance companies? I realize that they can all start to blend together to an extent, so I hope this video was able to give an overview of the industry while highlighting some of the more fundamental differences between the biggest companies within it. Statistically, most of the people watching this have auto insurance, so I want to know, which provider do you prefer and what is your reasoning behind it? And any other thoughts you have about State Farm, Progressive, Geico, Allstate, or any of the others, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Mike, what day is it, Mike?
Thank you for watching.